Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
Without wasting any time, let's welcome back our great friend Kevin Barrett to the programme. Kevin, welcome back.
Thank you, Richie. It's always great to be back with you.
Thanks very much, Kev. You had a brilliant article on Veterans Today last year, amazingly, on the 22nd of March 2016 about the attack in Belgium. And you talked about the satanic implications of that, ISIS, the numbers, the numerology around it. What did you make when you learned that there was an attack in London on the exact same date? What did you think when you heard that, Kev?
Well, it seems like these patterns just keep repeating. You know, it's not that I have to work so hard to connect the dots, because they almost pretty much connect themselves sometimes. And so, yeah, here once again on March 22nd, which is the culmination of the 3-day Satanic Feast of Pelusia, we have another of these attacks. And this attack actually was sort of a repeat of what was done over in Canada a couple of years ago. That was also on the 22nd. It was October 22nd, I think it was 2014. This Bebo guy supposedly shot up intruded on and shot up the Canadian Parliament in Ottawa. And in so many ways, we're getting the same old story here. You know, truck attack and stabbing attack, just like in Israel. And then we get the follow-up today over in Antwerp. So, again, it's you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to see these things. The clues just jump out in your face.
No doubt about it. Kevin, you're an educated man. You're an academic man. You're very clever. We know that. Did you, when did you start to look at that sort of symbolism? The, pagan feasts and satanic feasts. And for some of our listeners who won't have explored this before, how significant is this, and what do we know about the elites, let's call them, and their interest in this type of thing?
Well, it's a hard topic to really get a good grip on, Richie, because, of course, it's secret. Like all of the sort of top secret stuff one tries to look into in the intelligence world and organized crime and so on. The people who do that stuff don't really want you to know about it, or if they do, they don't want you to be able to prove it in court. But with the satanic stuff, it's clear that there are satanic cults out there. Nobody really denies that. And I personally I think I've had 2 run-ins with them. It's 2 almost attempted recruitments in my life, both when I was much younger. So we know that exists. And Freemasonry is a major power in the world, and there is a kind of a satanic element to Freemasonry. Some would go further and say that that's pretty much what Freemasonry is. Washington, D.C. is a maze of Freemasonic symbols, as Dan Brown explores in his novel The Lost Symbol. But I personally didn't really put much stock in any of this until I met Captain Eric May, a former Army intelligence officer who joined the 9/11 Truth Movement a little bit after I got involved in maybe 2004 or so. I actually helped him, or I encouraged him anyway, to come out publicly and say that 9/11 was an inside job. And he was very interested in the numerology aspect. For instance, he pointed out that there were exactly 911 days between 9/11 and the Madrid bombing. And he claimed that 11s are all over the place in these kinds of events. He said this was a code that the perpetrators used to sort of tag their events the way criminal gangster guys will, spray their graffiti on the scene of a crime or whatever. And then he said that's the way they communicate with each other and also sort of boast of their crimes. He said he didn't believe in it, but they do. And I listened to that and I looked into it. And the more I looked into it, the more it seemed like he was onto something. So now I'm very much willing to talk about it and write about it.
I must mention too, and I don't do this very often, but David Icke has been writing about Saturnism and Satanism and how it connects to those who control things. For many, many, many years. He's on tour at the moment, touring the world with a 11-hour presentation. And in that, he goes into this in great detail. It's horrifying stuff, a lot of it. It's an area of research that I only ever really came across through getting to know David and working with him. but it's vital. It's wonderful stuff, Kevin, that somebody like you, and I know you won't take that the wrong way, but somebody from, I mean, I've always described you over the years, you come from society. You used to be establishment. I mean, you know this. And for learned men like you to be going down these roads and not to be worried about talking about these things is a wonderful thing, I think, you know. I really mean that, because these are areas that are easily scoffed at by people, I suppose, in public life, and people who don't want to listen to the Kevin Barretts and the Jim Marrs and the David Icks of this world. But it plays a big part in how these things happen. I'm thrilled to read your articles last year, which I wasn't aware of last year, Kevin, but today as well. Let's talk about what happened then, the way it happened. How many times have you and I done interviews like this? We don't interview, we talk, and we talk about the glaring similarities. The man was known to the security services. He was known to be bad news. He was known to be trouble. He was radicalised. And it's a nice, neat package, because we've learned that ISIS have taken responsibility, and ISIS are able to manipulate people from thousands of miles away, inspiring people. Ordinary men who've lived in Birmingham for years and years and years, through watching beheading videos online, apparently become inspired to go and kill a whole pile of innocent people. Now, Kevin, you wouldn't have heard my monologue. You've got better things to do. But I've been talking about the way we don't get any questioning of the narrative whatsoever in the media. It's nice, it's neat, they tie a ribbon on it, here you go. And from your perspective, you must groan and think, well, I could now, Kevin Barrett, I could now write their scripts for them if they wanted me to do that.
Yeah, pretty much. But I've drifted into the opposite role, of course. So now I'm the go-to guy when one of these things happen. I almost feel obliged to crank out an article, you know, deconstructing it and pointing out the contradictions and the suspicious aspects of the event. You know, I've been cranking these articles out very soon after these terror events happen now for a couple of years. I guess I started with the Charlie Hebdo attack in January 2015, and then that went viral. And so now, you know, every time one of these things happen, I'm basically, it's my job to look at what really happened and crank out the article and, you know, talk back to the mainstream media and give people something a little more interesting and accurate to think about.
Isn't it interesting, Kevin, that in the wake of 9/11, they were happy to talk to people like you at that particular time? For whatever reason, maybe they thought, you know, at the time, I think the producers of these major news programs, they didn't really understand what was going on. I really do believe that. And when they heard that college professors, university professors were talking about it, they were keen to get them on. Isn't it it's not staggering to us, but isn't it worth noting? It's definitely worth noting that now in 2017, they wouldn't touch anybody asking questions about this. They wouldn't touch them with a barge pole. There's no way now that they're going to university professors, leading lights in independent media with big audiences. That they consider people, I suppose, now like you dangerous, Kev. Don't touch him. He's dangerous, you know?
Well, you know, I think we were always dangerous, Richie, including after 9/11. In fact, the most dangerous time for them was in the, you know, few months or maybe the first year after 9/11. It's always more dangerous shortly after the event happens, because that's when people are still malleable. They haven't really internalized any particular interpretation or framework or narrative. So that's when the perpetrators try to, you know, get them while they're traumatized and basically use coercion or brainwashing to sort of insert the official interpretation deep into their brains so they'll never question it again. And that's why I try to react very, very quickly to these events and get something out right away. I didn't understand that, of course, when 9/11 happened. It took me a couple of years to even figure out that it was obviously an inside job. But it was always dangerous. The reason, though, that they gave us our 15 minutes of fame back in 2006, and remember, that's 5 years almost after 9/11.
Yeah.
It was the summer of 2006 when the big mainstream media finally decided to push back against the 9/11 truth movement after having tried to ignore it for almost 5 years. And finding that the 9/11 truth movement was taking over the internet, they decided that rather than ignore it, they were going to have to push back real hard. So that's when they suddenly, did a big media hoopla over the conference in Chicago that I helped organize. And then a couple of weeks later, they ambushed me on a big mainstream radio show and tried to witch hunt me out of my job at the University of Wisconsin and drag me onto Fox News to fight with Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly. And so the Truth Movement had that sort of summer of 2006 in the limelight, but basically just to be beat up because the other side didn't know what else to do. And that didn't work for them. The polls showed that we were actually bringing more people on board by going on Fox News. So then they clammed up again, and we've all been pretty much blacked out of the mainstream ever since.
That's right. I mean, I've made several attempts because I obviously worked in commercial radio for a long time. And because of that, I've made several attempts. I've tried to sneak onto some of these programs in recent times. I came very close to getting onto BBC Radio 5 Live's breakfast program recently, and then having agreed to put me through, I lied, of course. I didn't give my name. Now, the reason I didn't give my name, I'm not trying to claim that I'm famous here, but the presenter of that breakfast program knows me and knows me through Twitter, so I didn't give my name, and eventually they twigged something, and I didn't get on. I remember at the time with you, of course, they didn't like the fact that far from brainwashing your students, you were doing the opposite. You were saying to your students, well, look, have a look at everything. Don't take people's word for it. Don't believe everything you hear. Go and have a look yourself. One of the things about this, what happened yesterday, which we're noticing more and more, and this is a recent phenomenon, is that the more successful alternative media outlets with the bigger audiences, and there's no jealousy here at all, this is a fact. We have ambitions here to reach massive amounts of people in the next 2 years, 3 years. We're not jealous, but we're not. Some of these institutions, Kevin, they've done a 180-degree turn. Last time you were on, we spoke about this. This is a real tragedy to have the Paul Joseph Watsons of this world screaming about the religion of peace and inviting fascists onto their programs to talk about how Islam is a religion of murder. How serious is this for you? You converted in 1993. You're a scholar. I know you speak multiple languages. You take your religion very seriously. How serious is it for you, one, as a Muslim, but two, if you can step out of your Muslim life for a second and look at it from the point of view of truth, how serious is this?
Well, it's really unfortunate that the biggest, former alternative media platform in the world, InfoWars, has basically sold out and made a pact with the devil. They used to be very, very good. And I remember my wife recently just reminded me of a time not that long ago when I had interviewed former BBC Mideast correspondent, Alan, what's his name? I'm forgetting his name. Anyway, Alan, my friend, was, I've become friends with him since then. He had just spoken with somebody at a major engineering firm who had confirmed that the towers and Building 7 were obvious controlled demolitions. And then so he came out as a 9/11 truther. He was the author of the Zionism trilogy, Alan Hart, right? And so I wrote a piece about Alan Hart, and I broke that news that Alan Hart endorsed the 9/11 Truth Movement. And InfoWars picked it up. And, of course, they got a lot bigger audience for it than I did. And they were very complimentary to me. They said, oh, yeah, Kevin Barrett, he's a great guy. And they were very accurate in reporting what Alan said, including his suspicions that the Israelis were largely behind 9/11. So InfoWars was actually still honest then. And that was, what 5 years ago or so?
Yeah.
And then somewhere along the line, something happened there. And I don't know what it was. Did they make him an offer they couldn't refuse? Did somebody get some really bad pictures of Alex? Or I don't know. I can't imagine what caused them to make that turn. But
money,
now,
Kev. I think
they're just like Fox.
I think it's just money. I think I've taken a very long, hard look back at what he was doing over the last few years to try and get some inclination as to what's happened. I think at some stage he saw there was a vacuum. He saw that there was a place vacated by Fox News. In terms of, you've got people fed up to their eyeballs with CNN, CNBC, ABC News, and then you have the lunatics on Fox. And I think Jones ranter and occasional screaming madman, he might come across as, he's not stupid. And I think he saw himself there. When people like Rush Limbaugh and people like that left Fox, I think he saw a gap there. I really do believe that. And he went with the money. And there's a lot of money in that, that so-called alt-right world, which is just bullshit. I mean, it's utter nonsense, because what they do is so tired and boring, and it's been done to death by Ann Coulter, Jesus, Mary Whitehouse in the UK many, many years ago. We've had them, I shouldn't say Mary Whitehouse, but we've had them here in the UK. We've had, that'll get a headline, comparing Alex Jones with Mary Whitehouse. But we've had jocks like that, these right-wing jocks who'll say anything, anything that's anti-minority, anti-liberal, I suppose, anti-left-wing. I think he saw that, Kevin, and I think he moved in on it. And it's been hugely successful for him,
Undoubtedly. And as Trump was reported to have said a few years ago, he said if he ever ran for president, he would do it as a Republican, because Republicans are stupid. Right. It'd be easy to con them into voting for him. And I think that Alex and others of that ilk see the same thing. They realize that if they're doing reasonably intelligent alternative commentary, there's a certain really, let's say slouching, knuckle dragging element that they're never going to reach. But if they dumb it down a few notches and ramp up the hate, they can bring in the knuckle draggers and get a bigger audience and make more money. And so that's a big part of it. You're right.
And of course, the British Empire, moving on, we talked about this before, and the part it played in creating Wahhabism. My pronunciations are terrible, Kevin. But of course, I know what Wahhabi jihad, I know what it is. I know that interpretation of Islam, by a very, very tiny minority of people. We look at Saudi Arabia, and these people do unspeakable things. And what we're seeing the likes of Jones and others reinforcing this faux narrative that Islam and Islamists are trying to take over the world. And that's the tragedy there, right there. And of course, you have Trump, who came to power on a platform of retreating from interventionism. What a crock that was. And then surrounded himself with neocon maniacs and Russophobes, as Paul Craig Roberts has said. And it's just business as usual, as Paul Craig Roberts has said, in the White House now, except the alternative media, the so-called alternative media, rather than challenging that, is propping it up. I can't believe that we've not moved. I can't believe we're still having these debates, whether or not Islamists are trying to take over the world and whether we should be looking under our cars. When, as David Icke said today from Iceland, Theresa May is talking about shared values in the UK. Well, at the moment, our values are give Saudi Arabia billions of pounds worth of weapons to bomb Yemen into the Stone Age, give radical Wahhabi jihadists all the money and all the weapons they want to bomb Syria into the bloody Stone Age. What do you do about it, Kevin? Where do we go from here?
Well, we have to keep telling the truth about these things. And as you said, this Wahhabi movement was largely created and funded and empowered by the British Empire. They're the so-called, radical Islamic movement, although they're so crazy that it's questionable whether some of them qualify as Muslims at all. And at the same time, the same forces, the House of Rothschild and the bankers that run the British Empire, created the extremely anti-Islamic Kemalist movement, behind Mustafa Kemal or Ataturk over in Turkey, to try to eradicate Islam from Turkey. The connection between these two things is that they were both done by the British imperialists and the House of Rothschild behind them to try to bust up the Ottoman Empire, which was this biggest and most cohesive Islamic political body. And they succeeded by this pincer attack. They whipped up these crazed Takfiris in Saudi Arabia who were mainly interested in attacking their fellow Muslims. More than 95% of their attacks, just like ISIS's attacks, are aimed at Muslims.
That's right.
So they're a radical anti-Islamic group. They're not a radical Islamic group. Just like the followers of Ataturk in Turkey, both of these groups should be seen as radical anti-Islamic groups that are designed to help destroy Islam. They were created by the Rothschilds and the British Empire, and they've been sustained by those same forces ever since.
And I can see it here in Manchester, Kevin, which has a huge Asian community. It has there are a lot of Muslims in Manchester from Pakistan and other countries where Islam would be the predominant religion. Of course, we have a Jewish community, a Sikh community, and by and large, people just get on, They get on with their lives and they get on. But I can see what's happening. I can see, and, I have my ear to the ground in this city, and I know a lot of people in this city, and I know that the Asian community, many of whom are practicing Muslims, are retreating. They're retreating because they feel a hostility towards them. There is a very, I don't want to say a far right kind of growth, but we are seeing more of that, who are, and I don't blame them, Kev, and this is terrible. It's terrible for me to say this. I don't blame them for being stupid. You can't help but understand that they're being manipulated, and so they're looking at all this news coverage. They're reading the Daily Mail. They're listening to Alex Jones and Paul Joseph Watson, Katie Hopkins in the Daily Mail and others, and they're believing it. So that division, that suspicion and that hostility which the elite wants is unfolding again before our eyes. And I often talk about this, Kevin, to people who say, you're an idiot, Richie, you're a bullshit apologist for Islamist violence. So I'm not an apologist for any violence at all. But ultimately, if we were to come together against the puppet masters who are manipulating all of this, and, and I don't want to say it because I'll get shot for saying it, then we'd see a genuine multiculturalism, for want of a better word, a real unity of people, putting aside, where you come from, what you look like, and understanding that there is a tyrannical hand that has a global depopulation agenda that wants to control us, and rather than believe the narratives that they present to us, which divides us, will take them on. That's ultimately, the answer to it, Kevin. But at the moment, we have hatred, we have division, and we have fear.
Well, right. I remember writing an article called Twilight of the Psychopaths many years ago, in which I began by saying that the only real conspiracy is the conspiracy of the psychopaths in power against the rest of us. And I still think that's true. And they're using this divide and conquer strategy, or this strategy of tension, as it was put in the era of Operation Gladio, to divert our attention from what's really going on and to get angry at powerless people who have nothing to do with our problems.
Years ago, when I first started down this road, I met an imam in Spain, and he was well clued in. He was really clued into what was going on. And he said, Richie, and this is way back now, he talked about migration, even migration into the UK in the, early 50s and onwards. And he said that migration was a deliberate program to divide and conquer people, because they were never going to integrate people. They were never going to, work it so that people got along with one another. They deliberately didn't want that to happen. And I remember he saying to me on the radio in Spain years ago, wouldn't it be an amazing thing if we all realised that and turned on them? And that's the answer, isn't it, Kevin?
Absolutely. And I think one of the reasons that Islam has been singled out is that there is this kind of anti-usury element in Islam that's held on. The Christians are also against usury, but they've kind of forgotten that over the years. Muslims haven't. And so as the banksters consolidate their control over the planet with usury as their biggest weapon, Muslims look a little scary because they haven't really been fully brought into this modern paradigm where we're supposed to accept bankster domination and usury.
And of course, isn't it right? Because you often see memes shared around social media, and you have to be careful with memes because there's a lot of nonsense in memes. But the Rothschild central banks, there are a number of countries in the Middle East where they've never been able to establish domination. And isn't it a wonderful coincidence that in the last 10 years or so, those countries have been targeted for annihilation?
Well, that's right. That's probably the main reason that Iraq was destroyed. It was kind of outside of the Western system, and it was playing around with its oil money in ways that the masters of the universe didn't appreciate. And then Gaddafi in Libya was actually trying to set up an alternative currency that threatened the euro. And that's not just speculation. We have that from WikiLeaked emails between Hillary Clinton and some of her major supporters. She admitted that's why they had to get rid of Gaddafi, was he was threatening the euro. So, Iran today is high up on the enemies list, and certainly Trump has been beating his chest about Iran. And that's the main problem with Iran, is they don't have a Rothschild central bank, and North Korea doesn't have a Rothschild central bank. And so it does seem that it's the holdouts against the central banking system that get demonized.
You're 100% right, Kevin, and this is something that doesn't get discussed enough. The reason why Iran was sanctioned in the manner that it was sanctioned by the United Nations countries, the United States and Britain and others, the NATO countries. The reason why Iran was sanctioned is because Iran is an oil-rich country, and Iran could not be seen to prosper in the way that we could prosper if we didn't have to borrow our money from criminal central banks which just invented out of thin air. If the world could see Iran using its natural resources for the betterment of its country and for its people, there would be uprisings right across the Western world, Kevin. And this is why countries like Iran and Iraq were set against one another and sanctioned back into the Stone Age. And people don't understand it. And you're right to make this comment about Trump, the hero of the so-called alt-right. Mr. Non-Interventionism now is talking about tearing up the Iran nuclear deal and all of that. These are scary times, these. Kevin Barrett is on with us, folks. We've got Kevin for about 5 more minutes. truthjihad.com, the excellent author, journalist and academic, my great friend Kevin Barrett. And you know, Kevin, when people, because I will get it tomorrow on social media, I'll get it for being an apology for terrorism. And I'll say to those people politely, when did you stop talking about Rothschild Zionism and its control of the economies of the world, apart from the ones we mentioned, and its manipulation of global events, its creation of phantom enemies like Red Russia, the Red Menace, and now radical Islam? When did you stop talking about that and going along with the Fox News, Daily Mail bullshit narrative of it's us and them, the lunatic radical Islamists want to kill us? Because ultimately, Kevin, there's only one enemy. It's not Jews, it's not Christians, it's not Muslims, it's the hidden hand that we talk about.
That's absolutely right, Richie. Well, one area I would correct what you said slightly is in the idea of these countries being sanctioned back to the Stone Age. Iran is far from the Stone Age right now.
You're right. 100%.
Yeah, it's in the middle of a boom. They're doing very well precisely because they've been sanctioned in many ways. They're actually able to manufacture their own stuff. They have the biggest auto manufacturing industry in the Middle East. And sanctions have acted as if they were like a tariff. So they've slowed down the imports of stuff manufactured abroad. The Iranians have had to manufacture their own stuff, and they're doing really well compared to all the other Middle Eastern countries around them. Likewise, Saddam Hussein's Iraq was the most technologically advanced, sophisticated, and successful of the Arab countries, which was partly why it had to be obliterated. And Gaddafi's Libya was also extremely successful. The people had by far the highest standard of living in Africa, the amazing infrastructure, a terrific water project that was set up. And so it's actually the potential success of these models that leads the empire to have to destroy them.
Absolutely. Kevin, listen, you're right. Iran is the absolute exception. Sanctions did hurt Iraq very badly in the 1990s, but you're right, Iran has been the exception. And those who control the likes of Puppet Trump and Puppet Merkel and May, they cannot allow the people of the world see how a country can prosper when its government doesn't have to borrow money at ridiculous interest rates, when it doesn't have to sell its natural resources, its state assets in order to survive. Kevin, you're brilliant, mate. I love talking to you. Thanks for taking the time out today, and stay in touch. You know you're always welcome back on our show. Thank
you so much, Richie. You're doing real alternative media. Keep it up.
Cheers, mate. There's not many of us left. Thanks, Kev. Talk to you real soon. The brilliant Kevin Barrett on the line to us there from Wisconsin.